Okay, so we're back for part 2 of our kibitzing of Igor Goreyev 2, or Igor Goreyev 2, who is generally accepted to be Alexander Morozevich, though it's not confirmed. Whoever he is, if it's not Morozevich, it is a super strong grandmaster because he's rated 2759 on the auto pairing. So, in the meantime, I've actually figured out how to pause the recording, which was harder than you might think. It took a little bit of digging to figure that out. So between games here, I won't have to just sit here in silence. I'll just pause the video and then start it back up when we get a new one. Because sometimes it takes a little while for these high-rated players to find a game on the 5-minute auto pairing. So, okay, Moro is playing some kind of I don't know, King's Indian attack sort of setup here versus the fianchetto. So typical King's Indian attack formation, which you can sort of just is sort of a system. You can sort of play it against whatever setup black decides to go for. Yeah, this knight to f2 move is common, sort of either to stick the knight on e3 or play h4, knight h2, h5, knight g4, stuff like that, try to get the queen in. So we'll see if he goes for the kingside attack or if he tries to play in center. If he's going to go for the kingside attack, it would, yeah, I was just going to say he was going to have to start out with e5 at some point. Now maybe h4, h5. So these are typical. These are very, very typical moves for the bishop f4, helping to control the e5 square. And queen c7, probably d4 would be the move, just to protect the e5 pawn. And yeah, so these are all very common moves. h4 is another common move, again, for the knight f2 sort of ideas. Knight h2, so yeah, h4, knight f2, possibly bringing the knight to g4, or knight h2, excuse me, possibly bringing the knight to g4 at some point. Yeah, okay, so he just protects it again with the queen instead of pushing the pawn. Not sure about that. This d pawn is now in a pin, and the bishop has pressure on the d pawn. So black should be okay here. It's just going to be a matter of, will he be able to hold off the attack? Maybe he should even consider something like h5. Maybe not. It would give up the g5 square, so knight g5 would probably come in at some point. But so far he's maintaining pressure on the e5 pawn. As you see, he's got 4 pieces attacking it. So none of white's pieces. The bishop on f4, the knight. Ooh, yeah. Now I was thinking c4 was a good idea because it helps block up the queen side and maybe even b3 here. Yeah. Blocks up the queen side, shuts down this bishop on the diagonal, and frees the... Well, it doesn't free the queen to move because there's still all this pressure on e5, but at least it sort of blocks up the queen side. So, and gets out of the d-pawn pin. And I don't think black really got any good squares out of that pawn formation, but he can maybe take now on c4 and try to use the b file. So something like c takes b4, b takes c4, b takes c4. He'll be on the b file. But even let's see, b5 takes c4, d takes c4 could be an option, but it would give him this passed pawn. Okay, he went for it. It does give it keeps the rook off the b file for now. It'll take some time. Black has to move the bishop and then play h4, h5 to try to create some weaknesses on the queen side here. But in the meantime, he does have a protected passed pawn, now threatening possibly to push it to d3 with tempo on the queen. On the other hand, now this bishop is open on g2. This bishop has that's another thing about pushing the d5 pawn onto d4. Oftentimes it can really open up this bishop to come to maybe e4 later to put pressure on the king side, and just generally is controlling the a file if this knight moves, so no rook could really come on to a1. But maybe black will just play d3, getting a protected passed pawn, or maybe his idea will be to play bishop b7, just trying to counteract this bishop on the g file. He does have this protected passed pawn, so sidestepping any d3 with tempo ideas here. Maybe white can play a3 just to chase this knight away. So like if d3 is played, then a3. Just chasing the knight and collecting the pawn. So d3 is probably not an option here. And in the meantime, Moro is used only a couple minutes here and Hermann has 1 minute and 45 seconds left now. So yeah, the other thing though about a3 would be it would put. Ooh, what about a3 now? And then queen takes a3. But this knight is now in a pin. Oh, he did play d3. I was busy talking about the times and didn't notice he played d3 here. So yeah, okay, he just decides to go for it on the king side, a pawn sacrifice. And wow, wasn't even thinking that the queen could take, but obviously it can. And now if queen takes, knight takes, the pawn on b3 is hanging. Okay, so it's protected when he takes the rook here. So material is equal again. And there's really no more... oh, the knight. The knight on d7 is hanging. Got to pay attention to that. So there's no pawn takes here. I don't know. It's hard to checkmate in positions like this without queens, but see if you can drum something up. Yeah, pushing the bishop back to this square on h8, and now bringing his own bishop to f6, maybe? Oh. His idea is probably to play knight g4 to f6. Yeah, that looks really strong, because that would force the bishop to exchange itself on f6, and then bishop f6. Okay, wow. Taking advantage of this nice tactic here, this pawn on c3 is pinned to the c4 is pinned to the rook on d3. So takes here, the bishop takes the rook. So also covering the f6 square. But he's going on with this knight g4 plan. Anyway, figuring that probably that at some point he can just move the rook to d2. Maybe he could have even done that earlier. Rook d2. Oh, but when the rook goes into d2 to attack this knight, then this knight will come into b4. But when this knight comes into b4, see, both knights would be hanging, so he'd have to move this knight to protect here. Then he would give up the f6 square. So knight f6 check, forcing bishop takes f6, and then bishop takes f6, and there could be real checkmating threats on the king. The dark squares are really weak, even without queens on the board. You can easily checkmate, but the more important thing, of course, is just that he's about to run out of time with 8 seconds on the clock, and probably. Okay, so he's just moving the knight. Maybe even he wants to play knight e. Oh, he resigned, but maybe he here wanted to even play knight d to e4, if he could manage it, and then get this knight into f6, which would just be a checkmating, or almost checkmating, because the king would bishop takes, knight check, and then the king would have to go into the corner here. But he just decided to resign, because this position looks pretty grim. You know, I mean, it's just that black's pieces are completely better, and he has no time. He has no time on the clock at all to do anything, even controlling the d file here. Okay, so I'll just quickly pause the video and bring it back up again if when there's a new 5 minutes. Okay, we're back, and he is playing now Back Soon from the United States, and we've got some kind of king pawn opening with c5, maybe a London system coming with bishop to f4 at some point. Let's see. Yeah, bishop f4. So now we have just sort of a London system after e3. This is just, yep, straight London system with now black playing the g6, bishop g7 fianchetto against the London system. So let's see, finger back soon. Let's see if he's got a name. Don't see a name in the profile, but obviously a strong player, rated 2509 on the 5-minute auto pairing is a good rating. So meanwhile, just typical development going on here. Yeah, white has, the London system promises white that he has a very solid position and a maybe a slight edge, but it's nothing particularly ambitious. So black also playing very solidly here now with d6. Probably wants to play knight b d7, and this is a typical maneuver on with the bishop coming to h2, just hiding, staying on this diagonal, and getting out of any knight h5 possibilities. So castling kingside, maybe he had the option to castle queenside there, but that would be pretty risky probably. So, alright, it's just a matter of seeing where the pawn breaks are going to come from here. White going for h4 now. Excuse me, a4. Maybe a5 is an option. Try to peel open the a file and get some play down there. I don't know what this rook c7 move was doing from black. It maybe his idea was to double up on the c file at some point after exchanging on d4, but there's not really many entry points on the c file. The bishop on d3 is cutting out any entry here on c2, etc. But now he's spending a little bit of time thinking here, trying to decide what to do. And yeah, he does decide to take now, opening the c file, semi-open c file. But he takes back. White takes back with the e pawn. So yeah, it's going to be hard to do anything on sort of on the c file, and he's sort of just a little bit cramped here, really looking for some space for his pieces. Now playing bishop to h6, interesting. I'm not sure what the point of that move was, but now the a file, maybe rook to a7 is an option. Queen b7, doubling on the a file, could be an idea. But he decides to go with bishop b5 first, pinning this knight to the rook. So yeah, I mean, white seems to be doing fine here if you ask me. He's got more space. All the minor pieces are still on the board, just a couple pawn exchanges, and now getting pressure on e7. And I thought c4 was a threat here, but it's not, because now the rook is guarding e7 laterally. So he moved the knight out of the way so that the rook could guard the e7 point, because c4 was a threat, chasing the knight, which is guarding the e7 pawn. So just trying to find some space for his pieces. He'd like to trade some minor pieces, I think, if he got the option. But honestly, I think White's position is just fine here. He's going to have to come up with Black's going to have to come up with some counterplay, maybe preparing e5, but that would be really hard to do. The bishop is nicely blockading the b pawn, which he would like to push, obviously. Oh, okay. That's a nice idea. So just exchanging dark square bishops, that was the ultimate point of putting the bishop on h6 in the first place. I suppose White could play g3, but that would just be a stupid looking move. So one way or the other, these bishops will probably come off here. And wow, you're retreating the bishop to f1. So you can see sort of how solid the London system really is here. White's not doing much, you know, he's just playing some solid moves, some safe moves, and now maybe trying to reposition the bishop on the long diagonal, or maybe even to h3 now. But you know, he's got a solid position. He's not trying for very much, but it's hard for Black also to come up with any ideas for counterplay. And yeah, sticking the knight back on f3, but maybe knight g4 could be annoying at some point. Okay, comes in with knight f5, and now knight g5. So possibly putting pressure on the e6 point at some point for a possible sacrifice, but I'm not sure. Okay, now knights are coming off the board. A knight f6 check, forking the king and the queen was a threat. So Black moves the king in to protect the f6 square and to get out of the fork. Yeah, the knight looks like a good piece on f5 because well, he can't be chased away. You have to really prepare to chase the knight away from the f5 square. And now moving the b pawn, maybe trying to get some minority attack sort of ideas here. He can't play b4 yet, it's just a sacrifice, unless he really thought he could penetrate on the c-file quickly. It's an idea. Now setting up this really nice battery on the a8 to h1 diagonal, so that could be very dangerous. And white tried to sneak in with queen g5, threatening to get in on the f6 square, but just f6, pushed f6 just to chase the queen out of there, protected by the rook. So now with queen b6, possibly doubling on the c-file and pushing b4 could be an idea here. Back soon, this US guy still has about a minute, a little bit less than a minute advantage on the clock. So we'll see what happens here. Now he can just place b4 right away, I think, but decides first to play bishop to e6, possibly in the name of just protecting bishop d5, in the name of protecting the e6 pawn from the pressure from the rook. So now getting on this this diagonal here, and wow, giving up the bishop. Holy, that looks really dangerous to give up the bishop with all this diagonal, with all this play on the diagonal here. The light squares are really weak around the black camp, and now he's really kind of going for it. I mean, I'm not exactly sure where the penetration points on the light squares will be, but it's pretty obvious that the light squares are very weak in this position. Now trying to push on the queen side, offering a bishop. What? What was the tactical idea there? Bishop takes check. I don't know. Well, now the queens have been traded, and the bishop came off. There was a tactic there, I guess. I just didn't see it. So we'll see what's going on here. It looks a little dangerous for white still, and actually black now just resigns because where is he going? Actually, with his king. Yeah, the light squares. I mean, look at this bishop. Now if the king goes to g2, rook h1 is checkmate. And like I said, it turned out in the end that giving up that light square bishop really won the game here for Morozevich. Just king here, then whoops, not there, but rook here is checkmate. Nowhere for the king to go. So okay, let's see if we'll see if we get one more game from Moro here. I'll just pause the video and bring it back if he plays. Alright, so we've got one more game here. So this will be the last one. We'll got a good number of games in today, and we'll just call it a game after this. So he's playing Maradona 2349 from Russia, and we're getting some kind of ready opening here with d3 and c4. So now sort of we're into the English system by transposition, where if you can imagine if white had played c4 and then black played e5 first, and then they both went for the fianchetto. This is an English opening now. So Moro deciding to trade on f6, giving up the dark square bishop for that knight, and now pushing quickly on the queen side. Now opening up this very nice English bishop here to try to put pressure on the light squares on the queen side in connection with these this push on the king side. And it would have been difficult to develop the light square bishop or move the b pawn because the rook is the b pawn is pinned to the rook. So now black has played c6 and somehow has like a 45-second time advantage. I didn't know where it all. It seemed like they were both playing their moves instantly, but black seems to have almost a minute time advantage now. So yeah, thinking about what to do here. Takes, then maybe pawn takes, and the knight is just covering the pawn. So just goes for straight up development. Black doesn't want to take on b5 because rook takes b5, just opening up an attack. coordination with bishop and rook on this pawn. So we'll see what happens here, but black just continuing to push in the center now with d5. And giving Moro here a little bit of a pause for thought about what to do. I don't really know. I mean, I used to play these English positions, but I'm not really sure what the best strategy here is. So he takes on c6, opening the b file, and what's the idea now? Yeah, not sure. Doubling on the b file, or just okay. He decides to take on d5. So I'm not sure if white really has an advantage from this. I mean, black has these two nice pawns in the center, and he just decides to challenge them right away with e4. And now if e5 might see knight d5, the idea being that if knight takes, then pawn takes. This is a pawn that's protected nicely by this bishop. Yeah, he went for it. So now if knight takes, then pawn takes, and this pawn on e5, e4, d5 is a passed pawn that's watched over by this bishop. But yeah, it would be hard to attack quickly because bishop b7 is ruled out. Rook takes b7, so, and then rook to b8 is ruled out because rook takes b8. So he just decides to attack the knight and force it to move or be defended again right away. So he Moro decides to defend it, and yeah, maybe something like rook b8 here. The idea is to take on b8 and play rook b1, or even rook c5 is okay probably, or just doubling. Okay, so he just decided to double, and now putting pressure on the rook. So maybe rook c5 is a move here. Taking control of the c file. He has a penetration point on c7, but maybe rook c5, rook c8 is an idea. So instead of trying to work on the c file, he decides just to go to work on the b file, where it may be a little bit easier for him to penetrate. So rook c7 looks like a real threat here. Getting on to the 7th rank, putting pressure on this knight, so the queen would have to like go back to d8 to maintain enough defense of the knight. So in the meantime, black's bishop on g7 is sort of hitting his own pawn here, but on the other hand, white's bishop is sort of hitting his own pawn. So yeah, I guess white's better in this position just because of the control of the b file and the quick potential for penetration to b7. So we'll see what white can do here. In the meantime, he's caught up completely on time, roughly equal now, and maybe white also has ideas like knight c4, maybe coming into d6. That could be very strong. c4 is just a nice square for this knight anyway, putting pressure on e5, so the bishop would be sort of tied down. Yeah, knight c4 coming in. Knight to c6. I'm not sure what the idea of that move is, other than to try to get the knight on a better square than on e7, and to get out of any potential pressure. But maybe rook b7 now is a real threat. Yeah, so he just decides to play a king safety move, get off the back rank and such. But the knight on c6 does also defend the e5 pawn. There's a point. So yeah, but now the penetration comes, and yeah, black seems passive here. But how to break through? A move like queen b5 could be an idea at some point. h3, h4. This could have the idea of playing h5, or now king h2 and bishop h3 to try to trade off light square bishops. Yeah, queen b5 just comes in with tempo on the knight. So where's the knight going is the question. I don't think it has any safe squares to retreat to. Yeah, it could go back to e7, I guess. But if he's not going to do that, he's going to have to either move the bishop or defend it with the queen. So yeah, but now trying to figure out what to do. he's now getting about a minute down on the clock. So he had a minute up on the clock, and is now a minute down on the clock. So he just decides to move the knight back to e7. Is knight takes e7, rook takes e7, rook b8 an option, just to get onto the back rank? Maybe. And then ideas of trying to sneak the queen on the back rank. No, the bishop does a nice job of covering the h8 square, but we shall see what happens. He comes in with knight d6. Wow. Sacrificing a knight. If knight, oh, but the knight can't be taken because the rook would be hanging onto e8 on e8. So now the rook is no longer hanging, so the knight has to go somewhere, or the queen has to interpose there. And actually, black resigned here. Yeah, how is he going to maintain protection of the knight on e7 now? If the queen moves away, then the rook just takes the knight. Queen to b8, for example. Queen takes b8, rook takes b8, and then rook takes knight, and he's just down a piece. So, all right, those were some fun games. I hope you guys enjoyed them, and we will see you next time with more videos. Bye.